Ever feel like trying to start a business is like, I don't know, trying to get into some exclusive club, but you weren't grandfathered in, like you're stuck paying dues you can't afford just to get in the door?
Yeah, you're definitely not alone in feeling that way. It's a common sentiment.
Well, today we are diving deep into a new economic model that is looking to shake that whole system up, to rewrite the rules of the game, so to speak.
Yeah, it's called the tokenized economy. It's really about going back to the basics, rethinking how we exchange value at the very, very core.
All right, so to wrap our heads around this, we've got two documents. One is a high-level overview, and then we've got the nitty-gritty mathematical deep dive.
Both of them, though, both of them are really emphasizing this new system, this tokenized economy being built on the Solana blockchain.
And that stood out to me. What is it about Solana that makes it so important here?
It's not just a random tech choice. It's baked into the whole philosophy. For this tokenized economy to actually work, transactions, they've got to be fast, they've got to be cheap, and they've got to be open to everyone. That's where Solana really shines. I mean, the tech is built for handling huge numbers of transactions at a fraction of the cost of other blockchains out there.
So I'm starting to see why the foundation, that technological foundation, really matters here. But paint me a picture. What would it look like to actually use this tokenized economy? The documents mention something about a barter system, but like on another level.
Right. Imagine instead of needing actual money, traditional money, to invest in a business, you could invest using tokens that represent, a future claim on that business's whatever goods or services they provide.
Hold on. So instead of giving a new bakery, let's say my dollars, I'm giving them bot bakery tokens.
Exactly. And those bakery tokens, they would give you, the investor, the right to, say, I don't know, a certain amount of bread every month or a discount on pastries, something like that.
Okay, I see. So it's not just about like owning a little piece of the company on paper. It's about having a real stake in the actual stuff they produce, the services they offer.
Exactly. And you know what? For businesses, this is huge. Instead of jumping through all the hoops, to get funding from banks, VCs, they can go directly to their potential customers.
Okay, so like crowdfunding, but like way more powerful. And instead of just getting a pat on the back or a tote bag or something, you get actual products or services down the line.
Right. And here's the cool part. Those tokens, they're not just like static rewards. They can change in value up or down, depending on how well the business does, how much demand there is for their stuff.
So the bakery takes off, everyone's lining up for their sourdough. Boom, my bakery tokens are suddenly worth more.
You got it. That's a key part of this whole tokenized economy thing. Aligning incentives, making sure businesses and consumers are on the same page in a way that traditional finance just hasn't been able to figure out.
Now, I got to ask about something else these documents mention. ICOs. I've definitely heard the term before, but if I'm being honest, I'm not entirely sure I understand what they are.
Yeah, initial coin offerings. They're basically like the crowdfunding rounds for companies in this new tokenized economy.
So instead of that whole Kickstarter campaign, our bakery would launch an ICO to sell these bakery tokens and raise capital.
Exactly. And just like with any crowdfunding, there's that element of risk. No guarantees the bakery is going to be a hit. Those token values could drop. But hey, if the bakery takes off, those early investors, they could be seeing, some serious returns.
Okay, so we've got the bakery, they've launched their ICO, people are, let's say, ready to buy in. How do they even decide on a starting price for these bakery tokens? Is it just like the Wild West out there?
That's where the really fascinating part comes in. This is where we start to see how the mathematical framework of the tokenized economy really comes into play.
You know me, I love getting into the weeds a little bit.
It's all about these things called bonding curves. Basically, you've got mathematical functions dictating how the price of a token changes based on, supply and demand.
So it's not just someone saying, okay, this bakery token is worth $5 and that's that.
No, not at all.
Hmm.
The price, it's determined by a formula, a preset formula, and that's where these bonding curves come in. It brings in, transparency, predictability.
Okay, we are definitely going to need to unpack these bonding curves a bit more because I have a feeling they're at the heart of how this whole tokenized economy would actually function.
Absolutely. And, there's not just one type. There are different types of bonding curves, each with their own, quirks and characteristics. The documents mention linear and exponential curves, for example.
Okay, well, let's save those delicious details for our next episode, where we'll dive even deeper into the fascinating world of bonding curves and how they shape this whole tokenized economy. Don't go anywhere.
All right, so we're back, and we are ready to tackle these bonding curves. I've got to say, When I was reading about this is where my inner econ nerd got really excited. It's like, we're not just talking about like money, we're talking about the rules of the game itself.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, right? Bonding curves, they're basically like the algorithms that decide how much a token costs based on how many people are buying and selling. And yeah, just like with the game, those rules, they make a huge difference.
So break it down for me. Let's go back to our bakery.
Huh.
They're using a bonding curve for their ICO.
Yeah.
What's actually happening? Okay, so picture a graph, like in math class. One side, we've got the price of our bakery token. The other side, the total number of tokens out there, right? The bonding curve. That's the line connecting those two.
So more tokens out there, higher the price?
Well, it can work that way, but it can also get way more complex. See, there are different types of these curves. The documents mentioned linear curves and exponential curves.
I'm guessing linear curves are the, let's say, more straightforward option.
Exactly. A linear curve, the price, it goes up or down at a steady, predictable rate. So for every, say, 100 bakery tokens someone buys, the price goes up a set amount, like, I don't know, 1%.
So it's like predictable, you can see it coming. What about exponential curves? Those sound a bit more volatile.
Oh, they definitely can be. Think of it like this. Linear curve, the price is like going up a hill, nice and gradual. Exponential, more like climbing a mountain, gets steeper as you go.
So sudden demand for those bakery tokens, prices could go through the roof.
Exactly. And that can be really tempting for investors looking for, a big payout. But of course, bigger potential rewards, bigger risk, exponential curves, they can make the market really jumpy.
Okay, so it's like the difference between, I don't know, a safe, boring savings account versus like putting it all on red on the roulette wheel.
That's a good way to put it. So choosing that right type of bonding curve is super important. It's a big decision.
For sure. It's like setting the whole tone for how this tokenized economy is going to work. And speaking of important players, can't forget about Solana itself, or, well, SOL, the cryptocurrency that runs on Solana. Even in this new world of bakery tokens, we still need some kind of, I don't know, anchor currency, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, even though this whole tokenized economy is about, moving past traditional money, SOL, it still matters. It's essential.
Break it down for me. Why is SOL still so important here?
Well, for one thing, SOL, it's what powers the whole Solana blockchain. You needed to pay those transaction fees to secure the network, all that.
Okay, so even if I'm using my bakery tokens, there's still a cost to actually making those transactions happen on the blockchain. SOL steps in to cover that.
Right. But it's bigger than that, too.
Yeah.
SOL, it acts like a benchmark, a way to measure the value of other tokens.
So even though I'm buying my bread with bakery tokens, I can still figure out what those bakery tokens are worth in SOL.
Exactly. It's all relative, The price of a bakery token, it might go up against SOL, it might go down. Depends on how the bakery's doing, how much demand there is for their tokens. Tons of factors.
It's like this whole shifting landscape of value with SOL as our North Star to help us make sense of it all.
I like that. And all that constant adjustment, trying to find that balance of the document called market equilibrium. That's the heart of how this tokenized economy is supposed to work.
Okay, so before we go any further, let's make sure everyone understands market equilibrium. What does that even mean in this context?
Basically, it's when the exchange rates between all these different tokens, it reflects what's actually happening in the real world, the demand for the actual goods and services.
So the price of bakery tokens skyrockets compared to SOL. That means people are really, really craving those croissants, right? The demand is off the charts.
Exactly. It's this fascinating back and forth between supply, demand, and, how much people value something, all happening on the blockchain.
Okay, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's talk about the elephant in the room. This all sounds great in theory, but what about when things go wrong? Who sets the rules in this tokenized economy and how do they actually enforce them?
You're hitting on some of the biggest, question marks, the what ifs that keep people up at night. And honestly, there aren't easy answers, which is part of what makes this whole thing so interesting to think about.
It's true. It's not like we're just like changing currencies here. We're talking about redesigning the whole system, and that includes figuring out who's in charge, right?
Exactly. Like in a traditional economy, you've got governments, central banks, regulators, all these institutions making sure things are, fair, or as fair as they can be. But with something like this decentralized system, who's calling the shots?
It's like that whole on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog thing, but like on the blockchain, nobody knows who's really pulling the strings.
Right. That's exactly it. And that's where things get really tricky. because now you have to find ways to build that trust, that transparency, that accountability into the system itself from the ground up.
The documents did mention smart contracts as a possible way to handle some of this governance stuff. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
It's part of it, yeah. Smart contracts, they can take care of some of the, I guess, more basic governance stuff, like, say, making sure there are always enough tokens in reserve, or that the profits get split fairly between token holders. It's all automatic.
So the code itself becomes the rule book in a way.
In a way, yeah. But it can't just be code, you know? You need people, human beings, to make decisions, especially when things get messy, when there are disagreements.
Right, because what happens when, like, two people interpret a smart contract differently, or there's a disagreement about whether a transaction was legit or not? You can't exactly take a smart contract to court, can you?
Exactly. And that's why a lot of people think this whole idea of community governance is going to be crucial in the tokenized economy. Think of it like a digital democracy, you know? Everyone who holds tokens, they have a say in how things work.
So instead of those big, powerful institutions, we're talking about a system that's run by like a network, a distributed network of participants, and they all have a stake in making sure it works. That's a pretty radical idea, but I kind of like it.
Me too. It's definitely got potential. But it's not like it's a perfect solution. Figuring out how to make sure everyone's voice is heard, how to keep the bad actors out, how to make decisions quickly and effectively, that's the challenge.
It's like we're not just talking about a new economy, we're talking about a whole new way of like governing ourselves.
Hmm.
Which brings me to the big question, the really big question. Can this even work? Can this tokenized economy, with all its cool ideas but also all of its potential problems, actually function in the real world?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And honestly, I don't think anyone has the answer yet. We're in the early stages, so much we just don't know, so many things that need to be tested out in the wild.
So much we still don't know about this tokenized economy. Huge questions like, can it actually work in the real world?
Yeah, and it's not just about the tech, right? It's about whether people, everyday people, businesses, are actually going to buy into this whole thing.
And whether, even if they do, can you really build a stable system when so much of it is about, like, letting go of control, decentralizing everything?
It's a huge leap of faith, right? I mean, we're so used to having those central authorities, those institutions
Yeah.
calling the shots.
Exactly. So if we're talking about a system where, in theory, anyone can launch a token, anyone can invest, how do you even begin to regulate that?
Yeah.
How do you protect people from scams, from market manipulation, all the things that, let's be real, happen all the time in traditional finance?
That's the challenge, isn't it? Finding that balance between freedom and security. The documents do talk about, the importance of transparency, how everything on the blockchain is, trackable, auditable.
Right. That's the beauty of the blockchain, that immutability. But transparency by itself, I don't know, it doesn't feel like enough, does it? Like if something shady happens, I can see the record of it, but can I actually do anything about it?
That's where things get really interesting and where this whole idea of community governance, it takes center stage.
Right. We touched on this a bit earlier, the idea that in a decentralized system, maybe it's the community, the
Yeah.
token holders themselves, who become the regulators, the decision makers.
Exactly. It's like instead of relying on, I don't know, some government agency to swoop in and fix things, it's up to the community to self-police, to set the standards, to hold each other accountable.
Which, okay, again, sounds good on paper. But how do you actually make that work at scale? I mean, imagine trying to get 1 million people to agree on like what color to paint a bike shed, let alone something as complex as managing a whole economy.
It's definitely not going to be easy, that's for sure. And there are a lot of different ideas floating around about how this community governance thing could actually function. Some people talk about like using prediction markets to, I guess, get a sense of what the community thinks about certain issues. Others are looking at like different voting mechanisms, ways to give people a voice proportional to, how many tokens they hold.
So it's almost like we're not just reinventing economics, we're having to reinvent democracy at the same time.
Totally. And, there are definitely going to be bumps along the way, maybe even some spectacular failures. But the potential for this to create a more equitable, more democratic system, it's hard to ignore.
It's true. It's like for the first time, we're really grappling with what it means to build a financial system that's actually truly by the people, for the people.
Right. And that's what makes this whole conversation, even with all the what ifs, even with all the unknowns, it's just so exciting.
Totally agree. This tokenized economy, whether it ends up taking over the world or just, existing as an interesting experiment, It's forcing us to rethink some really fundamental assumptions about how money works, how power works. And honestly, I think those are conversations worth having, even if we don't have all the answers yet.
100%. It's about being open to new ideas, to new possibilities, and yeah, maybe getting a little uncomfortable sometimes as we, challenge our own beliefs about how the world should work.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, to everyone listening, let us know what you think. Is the tokenized economy the future of finance? A utopian dream? A recipe for disaster? Join the conversation. Until next time, this has been The Deep Dive.